Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you all here. We are discussing today a new special report of Alma Center about actually the Syrian weapon development industry. The name is CERS. It's a center that is composed of many institutions. Just to get started, I want to screen a short video. Let's see if I will succeed in doing that with all the technology. I will share the video here. Okay. This is basically the report we published, and you can see the visuals, and you can see the main key points in the report. The fact that CERS Institute are involved in chemical weapons, in the Burkan rockets, and the damage that all of these are doing. The fact that Iran is greatly involved today in CERS. Here you can see how it's built, the structure of CERS, the different projects around different topics. The report will be available in our website by the end of this very short briefing. We actually pointed at around 18 sites of CERS, different kind of sites, conventional and non-conventional weapons. 10 of them are in specific locations that we could actually see the building of these institutions. We also talked about the campaign between the wars and how it implicates the capabilities of CERS. We pointed at 17 figures involved in this center, involved in the past or in the present, due to our information, and also to specific Iranians there. We have with us today Seth Frantzman, who is the news editor of the Jerusalem Post and an expert to Middle East in general, and I am honored to have you with us today to this kind of a joint venture to see how can we publish this report and get a lot of echoes. And I wanted to ask you, how do you feel this report is entrenching the bigger picture of the Iranian involvement in the region and in Syria? How do you see this contribution?
Well, it's a very interesting and important report, and I think it's very, very timely because we're starting to see how I think Iran is basically continuing to move a lot of pawns and chips in the region towards Israel's borders. And we've been seeing a lot of heightened tensions in the north relating to Hezbollah kind of provocations on the northern border. We've seen a lot of incidences now in Jenin with a different an operation that was there earlier, and also in Gaza. So I think if you look at the broader context, this report is really super important because it brings back the spotlight to the real danger of what's happening with the Syrian regime, the fact the regime has these sites, the fact the regime apparently never gave up all of its chemical weapons, or certainly its ambitions, and the fact the regime is involved in the missile projects and other things that somehow tie in with the larger kind of Iranian octopus and the way in which the Iranians would like to, I think, generally try to move as many threats as possible closer to Israel's borders, as opposed to being some sort of third circle threat that's in Iran or in Iraq or whatever, or even in Abu Kamal or whatever, back further afield. So I think the report is really helpful because I think it raises a big alarm. And I think the big question we have to look at is the Syrian regime is integrating back into the Arab League. The Syrian regime is all of a sudden being normalized in the region. The Syrian regime foreign minister was just hanging out with the Iranian foreign minister. The Syrian regime is meeting with the Jordanians and with the Gulf, all sorts of different groups. And look, at the end of the day, the regime is not going to go anywhere. But the regime needs to, I think, understand that it should not be doing all sorts of nefarious activities with the Iranians that provoke tensions in the region. I think that's where your report is really, really super helpful.
Thank you so much for that. And, I just, to tie things up with what you said, in the report you can also find the different cases that the Syrian government used chemical weapons against its own people, and how the campaign between the wars attacks is trying to stop this production of advanced weapons in Syria. And though there were successes, we see that the Iranians very, very quickly are coming, and helping the Syrians rebuild all the infrastructures that were destroyed. And the motivation is still there to shorten the corridor, as you said, and actually transfer the platforms from Iran, actually endangering Iran itself, into Syria, and that way endangering others, and also shortening the distances from the militias that will actually get this kind of equipment. Let's say a few words about the advanced weapon that is being produced in CERS. We've seen in the video, we've seen Burkan. We can talk about the UAVs. You yourself wrote a book about the risks of UAVs. What's your take about that and this kind of advanced weapons?
Well, I think that, at the end of the day, the Syrian regime doesn't have the massive conventional army that it used to have, I guess, back in the 60s or 70s, when it was a Soviet supplied army that was closer in terms of appeal to Israel somehow. However, that being said, I think the missile projects, precision guided munitions, chemical types of weapons, and I think even your report mentions, the way in which derivatives of chemical weapons like ammonium nitrate or whatever that was involved in the explosion in the port in Beirut, this can have all sorts of add-on effects that are very, very bad for the region. So the existence of any types of these types of weapon systems or research or missiles, none of it is good. And none of it had any real purpose, because the Syrian regime doesn't need chemical weapons. It doesn't need all these missiles to fight who? I mean, the Syrian regime who is the Syrian regime going to fight? Iraq? No, they're friends. It doesn't need all these weapon systems. The only reason for the weapon systems is to threaten Israel. I mean, it seems that that's the only logic there. And considering the fact that the Syrian regime spent 11 years fighting its own people in a brutal civil war, but we continue to see the investment in these types of sites, I think is an incredibly clear and present danger relating to what happens in Israel, and I guess apparently to the trafficking to Hezbollah and those types of things.
So you said Hezbollah. I want to take that even one step further and say that in the hands of Hezbollah there are tens of thousands of different kinds of rockets. I want to focus on the project to make them accurate, the precision guided missiles, which is part of the production is being made in CERS, and the main institution that is involved is 4,000. This is the institution that actually where you see the deepest Iranian involvement in, with this project of making the Fatah 110 or M600. That's the Western name of these missiles that can get up to a range of 300 kilometers. And these are the missiles that actually eventually goes to the hands of Hezbollah, and we understand that the Iranians are there in CERS to make these rockets accurate. We don't know how many already got to Lebanon. It's a problem. There is another project of making the missiles accurate of rockets which are shorter in shorter ranges. The project name is Labayek, and it's mainly in Iran. That there is an open question here. We don't have the indication whether this project will also be transferred into CERS in Syria. And this would be very interesting because these rockets are to shorter ranges, but there are many, many of these, tens of thousands in the hands of Hezbollah. Seth, can you say one word? I don't know, we wrote very little about it in the report, but I think it's also important to ask the question about the air defense in Syria, and how is this air defense systems contribute to protect CERS, to protect from the campaign between the wars? Does it succeed in doing that?
It doesn't seem that Syrian air defenses have generally been very successful at all. I mean, it seems that they're more dangerous in terms of firing the weapon systems wildly and ending up with missiles flying to Cyprus or ending up somehow by mistake in southern Israel. I mean, they're dangerous in the sense that they they make a lot of mistakes. But in the end of the day, the Syrian air defenses, whether it's the S-200s or the Pantsers or other types, they're supplied by the Russians. So the Russians are now involved in a massive war in Ukraine. But the Russians, as we know now, they're flying their planes all over Syria, and they're causing a lot of trouble, harassing Americans, and particularly American drones, Reaper drones. So what we're seeing is that the Russians, even though supposedly Russia is distracted by Ukraine, it's obsessed with Syria. And I think we have not seen evidence, apparently, that the Russians are giving the Syrian regime better air defenses. We have heard over the years that the Iranians would like to move air defenses to Syria or Lebanon, including the third Cordad system, which is an advanced air defense system that was used to shoot down a U.S. Global Hawk back in 2020. So I think there is a danger there. I think that in the end of the day, Israel or other countries that are partners of Israel, like the United States, are operating fifth generation aircraft, fourth, fifth generation. So I don't think there's evidence yet those air defenses have posed a big problem, but that doesn't mean that they're not dangerous. The fact that a Syrian air defense missile in 2017 flew over Jordan into Israel and had to be intercepted by the Arrow system, I think was a serious problem. The fact that one of their missiles flew all the way to the southern Negev, somewhere near Dimona, I think a year or two ago. The fact that they fired a missile that ended up in Cyprus, or in northern Cyprus. I mean, these are dangerous, big surface-to-air missiles, right? That can cause a lot of damage and killing. So it's not. They definitely possess them. And the question, I guess, is whether or not the Iranians or the Russians will modernize those systems in the coming years, especially because in October, some of the sanctions relating to Iran's import and export of arms will apparently end. So there'll be some sort of a sunset. And that can cause some sort of a bang-on effect where Iran imports systems or technology, maybe from Russia or China, wherever, I don't know. And then you see that technology ending up in Syria somehow.
Moreover, will we see a scenario that the technology that is being produced and developed in CERS will end up in the hands of Russia, that is already present there, and as you already mentioned, is teasing the American presence. This is, we are not there yet, but it's an open question. There is a question here from Lapin, from the audience. How come the UN and the OPCW go on mute on the new chemical substance being stored in CERS? I feel it's kind of admitting their own failure, but because the production is still going on. How do you feel about it? With the UN inspection saying that there is no chemical weapon in Syria anymore a few years ago, and we've seen that they actually used it against their own people.
I mean, unfortunately, I think we've seen in the region generally that the United Nations or other types of international organizations, or even the international community as it is, just has generally not been able to do much. I mean, they put out statements or words. There was the attempt apparently to dismantle some portion of the Syrian chemical weapons program, but in the end of the day, it seems that regimes like Syria, they just operate with almost total impunity. I mean, the very fact that the Syrian regime has killed, apparently hundreds of thousands of people, and I think driven like a third of the people from the country, there doesn't speak to much international community doing much. And also the fact that, Turkey is occupying parts of northern Syria, and no one seems to notice what's happening there either. I mean, you've got also extremist groups there. That's why apparently the Americans are flying Reaper drones around Idlib province, apparently monitoring some extremists or doing other things. So this perception in Syria generally is it's almost a free-for-all and kind of Hobbesian world, and that international law or rules or what have you have generally been out the window. And I tend to think, by the way, the Russian decision to go into Ukraine last year was probably in part because Russia was able to do whatever it wanted in Syria since 2015. And in part, it did whatever it wanted in Georgia in 2008 and just thought it could just keep doing whatever it wants. So I think we tend to see how those international concepts that are on paper just don't seem to very rarely operate very well in the real world.
I agree. So if I want to wrap up what I can say, is that we try to put on a report here that actually exemplifies the Iranian taking over the region, and that way bringing the industry from Tehran or from Iran into the region, that way shortening what we call the corridor, shortening from 2,000 kilometers to, you can just transfer these weapons to the militias that are already in the scene in Lebanon, in Syria itself, and in Iraq. I can say that the fact that, we are saying here something very important, very loudly, that the chemical capabilities of Syria were not dismantled in 2013. The last time it was used against the Syrian civilians is 2018, as far as we know. This is very important, and it can also there is the option that this will end up in the hands of Hezbollah. Another small point in the report is the fact that the Syrians are working to eliminate anybody or anyone that may threaten the secrecy of this project. And we have seen killing a few seniors that were involved in CERS in the past few years, including in last February, a colonel that was involved in the chemical industry over there. It has an important role in the project of making the rocket accurate of the PGMs. And again, even though there is a campaign between the wars, and even though these places are being attacked again and again and again, they are being rebuilt as well. And since the knowledge exists in Iran, the Iranians can bring it back to Syria again and again and again. Bottom line, I think we both agree, said that it's not only about Israel. It's actually kind of a global threat. The policy and the way it is happening, as demonstrated in our report, because you see that these weapons are eventually even crossing the ocean all the way to Caracas, threatening Ukraine in Europe. And that's why I think it's so important to bring people to the awareness of what is happening over here as well. So one last word from you before we say goodbye.
No, it's great. It's good. I think it's an important report. I think it's very important to keep reminding people what's going on in Syria, and especially as the regime seems to be ingratiating itself again throughout the region. It certainly seems that most countries in the region, some of which are Western partners, I think will not want the regime to create weapons or things that destabilize the region. So hopefully shedding light on that will maybe encourage some of those who have influence over the regime to encourage them to not continue down the wrong road.
So thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for publishing your piece in Jerusalem Post. Guys, I want to say thank you for joining us. I hope this was enriching. I hope you will publish and echo that as well. And we are here for any questions. You are invited to WhatsApp or email us. We are here for you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.